Well, good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are tuning in to this webinar. I'm very excited for this occasion because we're going to be celebrating CTA's 5th birthday. In some ways, it's hard to believe that it's already been 5 years, and in other ways, I feel like I've been at this already for quite a long time. So, but I'm very excited for the conversation that we're going to have today. When I reflect on the journey that CTA has taken over the last 5 years, the key lesson that I take away is that information sharing, cyber threat intelligence sharing, really does make a difference. It provides value to the community, it makes us safer, but it's also very hard to do well. And it's hard to do consistently, and it's hard to do at scale. And thus, I think it's really appropriate that we have 3 longtime CTA members on the webinar today to talk about this issue, about sharing over the long run. Semantic and Checkpoint were 2 of our founding members, and Sophos joined not long after we got CTA going. So I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves, but here's a fun fact for you. This is actually a panel with 3 Joes and Dorit, because although I go by my middle name, my actual first name is Joe. So we've got 3 Joes plus Dorit. So Joe Chin, let me start with you to introduce, and then we'll just go around.
I'm one of the 3 Joes. I'm Joe Chen. I'm Joe Chen of Symantec, in enterprise division of Broadcom. I've been with the company for 2 decades, and I've been with CTA since day one.
Great, thanks, Joe. Joe Levy.
Hi, I'm the next Joe, Joe Levy. I'm the Chief Technology and Product Officer at Sophos. I've been with Sophos for about 7 years now. Been a member of the CTA for nearly 5 years. I'm proud to serve as a member of the board of directors at the CTA as well, and have been in the industry for about 25 years.
Great. And Dorit.
Yeah, hi, my name is Dorit Dor. I'm at Checkpoint 26 years by now. I'm a chief product officer, but I manage all these years the products and the research and development, including like all the cyber research activities. So I have had the kind of the insight research view on things, as well as the customer, market, and industry view on the changes. And it's been really a pleasure to be part of such a refreshing initiative, such as the CTA, and be part of this panel today, being the only non-Joe in the room.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to our conversation. So I think just to start off, there are a number of information sharing groups that have been around quite a while. I mean, when you look at like FSI-SAC, they're approaching actually, or the Financial Services Industry Sharing and Analysis Center, they're approaching 25 years. So, the cybersecurity industry was slower off the mark to get, sharing, formal sharing efforts going. And, when I give presentations on CTA, I often get asked how we persuade cybersecurity companies to share threat intelligence, since that's often perceived as their product. But what I want to ask all of you is, but why does sharing threat intelligence make sense for a for-profit cybersecurity provider? And Joe Levy, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, this is a very common question when it comes to sharing something that's often considered proprietary within our industry. It's the lifeblood of what most of the companies that participate in the cybersecurity space do. And I always like to begin with a quote from Thomas Jefferson, which I think helps to frame the topic quite well. And it's on the concept of ideas and the spread of ideas, or the sharing of ideas. And Jefferson was recorded as saying, "He who receives an idea from me receives instruction without lessening mine, as he who lights his taper or his candle at mine receives light without darkening me." And I believe that when it comes to ideas or intelligence or threat intelligence within the industry, it's a very, very similar kind of dynamic. We have an ability to share without diminishing ourselves, and there's a variety of different strategies that we can employ to be able to achieve this. But ultimately, what we're looking to do is we're trying to collectively create a more hygienic operating environment for everyone who operates in the information technology space. And the best way that we can do this is to make sure that there is kind of a uniformity in the availability of the threat intelligence information that's collectively known by the industry. No single vendor is able to discover everything on their own. So the ability to collect this information together and then disseminate it and then put it into some sort of productive use is the best way that we're going to combine our forces and our energies to be able to succeed against cyber adversaries. And what that does is it creates an opportunity for vendors to then differentiate themselves, to be able to go above and beyond in the creation of their technologies and the way that they can operationalize it, really. So differentiating the operationalization, don't necessarily attempt to differentiate within the intelligence itself is the position I prefer to take.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And talking about how, really the differentiation is not on the raw data, but on what you do with the data, right? Dorit, how would you answer that question? Why does threat intelligence sharing make sense for a company like Check Point?
Yeah, so I take it beyond like general idea sharing. I think something about cyber requires sharing. And so for many years, I participate in panels. So I didn't say, but also before joining Check Point, when I was just 2 years old, I was already in the cyber, no, just joking. I was already talking in panels about cybers. And so we would always talk about the fact that the bad guys collaborate and that they have sharing and they have kind of amplification from this sharing. And I think it does call in the cyber industry specific for sharing as amplification of our capability jointly. And it's more important for us to protect the world and share than just kind of defend our own and miss things for the customers. It would be terrible if we miss things for the customers just for, unwillingness to talk. But I also want to take two more angles. One is the angle of even selfish angle. When we share, I see other people's data too. I get the impression of what they do too, and I get some calibration to my capabilities. It sometimes serves as a wake-up call. Sometimes it's serve as a pride. It could be served for different purposes. But it's like going to a third-party validation. Hey, you could say, I must go to a third-party validation in order to stand out, but there is something else about third-party validation that makes you see in honesty how you do. So that was point number 2. And point number 3 goes to something that Joe said. It would be very easy for me to say Joe said because all of you are Joe. So point number 3 is about like what do you do, the differentiation. Here, it's not just the operationalization. It's also the purpose of what you build. If we are more focused on prevention versus detection, there would be some ingredients of our feeds that would be different, but the purpose of why we come to serve them is also different. So it actually doesn't necessarily hurt our differentiation if we share the information.
Oh, those are all great points, and I like your point about the validation, even from and either as a wake-up call or as a point of pride. Yes, we're doing really well, or oh wait, we've actually got some work to do. And both of those are valuable pieces of feedback. Joe Chin, how would you answer that question about why it makes sense for Symantec to share?
I think take a customer-centric point of view. It's all about the customers. We all can compete, but ultimately it's about having the most comprehensive set of threat intel and also be able to automatically deploy to all the control points. Largest customers are going to have multi-vendors in their environment, and they expect us to work together to ultimately protect them. And that's ultimately better for everybody. So we should share and continue to do so.
That makes sense. That all makes sense. I mean, we know that, on the flip side, we know that information sharing can be challenging. And we live that every day in CTA. And there's a reason why the, companies like Symantec and Check Point and Sophos came together to create a nonprofit with, staff and things to actually help make that sharing easier on you and to make it enduring. from your point of view, and maybe Dorit, we'll start with you, what are some of the factors that hinder information sharing, and how do we overcome those barriers?
Yeah, I think that the main challenge, I think it's kind of somewhat evident in Israel than in other places. We always look aside, and we don't want to be like a underdog or something. And so if there is a team and somebody share less than the rest of the team, there is some unpleasant feeling, and hey, it's unequal, and why should he get all the data and not contribute anything? And it's the fairness of the system that helps you look it in the eye and say, yeah, I'm fine. We are all sharing a minimal agreed amount, some significant amount. We all get scored on what we share, so it's not just garbage sharing. It's sharing something that's meaningful, that's valuable to the other members. And so now there is no hesitation, because we all come from a good ground. We all good contributors. We are all good players in this community, and sometimes this requires enforcing. So it would be nice to be in the world that we would all be contributing evenly without enforcement, but with enforcement and with tracking, it's even more evidence and clear.
Yeah, no, that's CTA in many ways, I've often said, was designed to actually, deal specifically with that free rider problem, right? Really make sure that that we can address that head on and make sure that we've got everybody contributing equally. Mr. Chin, how would you answer that about some of the factors that hinder information sharing and how to overcome them?
I think sharing is something that started to happen even prior to CTA, obviously, right? Folks used to share at the individual level, folks that knew others, and it was very difficult to scale. You could not get scale to the point where now what CTA is 30, 40 folks that are now sharing consistently. To scale, you have to have that framework and trust and that mutual validation, right? And there's a basic level of kind of, tall enough to get on the ride. And I think that's the, I think there's the enabler that's now, we have a kind of a common understanding of what that has to be. And also, we ultimately, you're also concerned about, we're in security business, you are concerned about points in the well, if you will, right? So, right. So now there's more than just us kind of validating that data amongst other vendors. And, I think it's fairly, a little bit public. There's some more transparency into the sharing process and the quality and the quantity and all that. So you still have to validate, but it certainly puts another layer of kind of guardrails against it. And now we've scaled it up to a point. It's not just one-two sharing, but it's still enable. I guess the individual analysts will now have a friend to phone in case there's a deeper analysis to a particular kind of campaign. So the breadth and the depth and all that, I think CTA's framework allow us to kind of overcome some of that. So that helps.
Yeah, and I think that's we're at 34 members right now, and it's interesting how that has scaled up over time. And even our we don't share in exactly the same way that we started out, right? We've improved it over time. We've learned over time how to scale up a lot of that sharing. And you're right. The other piece of it is that transparency, right? The fact that when you share with CTA, it stays associated with your company, right? So you've got to stand behind what you share to us, because it's associated with your company and your name and your brand.
That's right.
And I think that's really important. Again, it helps reinforce the quality part. Joe Levy, how would you address some of those barriers? What are some of the factors from your view that hinder that sharing, and how do we address them?
Yeah, the biggest hindrances I've observed, and this is from personal experience within the industry, from conversations with trying to recruit other members into the CTA. It begins with the free rider problem. As you already mentioned, there's just this general concern that you're not going to get a kind of a parity of participation, and that everybody is going to share the poorest quality data or the oldest data that they have in the hopes of being able to obtain the highest quality data from other vendors. So really what underlies that is a kind of a cynicism about how these information sharing efforts have worked in the past. And I understand how people have arrived there. Historically, they just have not worked as well as we would have liked. And I think that CTA continues to stand out as just a shining example of how sharing can actually work well. And then on a practical front, the issues are around logistics and data quality. When companies are just getting started in information sharing efforts, there's a data curation, a data organization hardship that they just need to work through. They might be in the business of sharing threat intelligence within the apparatus of the products and the services that they deliver, but they don't necessarily have the means to be able to share that information at scale with other organizations, and this bi-directional, of course, inbound and outbound. So making that initial investment in building the connective tissue to a sharing organization like the CTA, it takes time. It takes time and effort and human resources. After that's done, though, then the curation of the data, things like privacy considerations and the provenance of data and what do you share and what don't you share, that sort of thing, it works itself out as the infrastructure begins to mature, but the infrastructure needs to be created in the first place. And that does bear some very real world costs.
Yeah, no, I think of that as the sort of anti-field of dreams, problem. Just because you connect it, the data doesn't necessarily flow, right? And it's for all of those reasons that you were just talking about, right? That it actually requires investment to make it work, and that for all of the information that flows around the internet as a whole, right? The making it actually worthwhile and making it high quality, right? Going through that curation process and dealing with the privacy issues, like all of that does take time and investment. And I think it pays off over the long run, but you've got to, you got to get over that, that hurdle. So I think that's, those are all really good points when you think about, that and how CTA was actually built to address those factors. So, I mean, I think maybe the next question I'll sort of turn to is, what are some of the threats or problems that the cybersecurity industry faces that really only can be effectively addressed through information sharing? Dorit mentioned, the bad guys collaborate, and we've talked about, how some of the threats change, but Joe Chen, how do you sort of think about some of the threats or problems that really only can be addressed by sharing?
I think things are just always kind of moving really, really quickly. I just think no vendor has visibility in all control points, and that constant feedback loop. I think the fast iteration, that speed in which we can approach a problem, I think that's super, super key. And not single vendor can really do all this, all at once. I always see it, and validating all the data. For example, that I think one of the most valuable thing we see that's super real out of CTA is the I forget the term we'll call it, the one-off early shares.
The early shares, yeah.
The early shares, and I think the early share program is really wonderful. It's beyond the kind of what we share at a scale massively, right? Like last year, we all of the 200 things we saw that other vendors going to give us a heads up on. Hey, here we're doing some special research, and here we found something. Out of about 100 things, we were able to look at it and kind of really illuminate the data set and be able to see, let us be able to ship certain protection, very explicit things earlier. Let's say it was a day, let's say it was a few hours, whatever. It did help. Whatever the timing is, it does help, and also give us a time to say when the customer phone us and say, hey, have you seen this? So we can honestly say, yes, we saw it. We also saw it from a partner. Whether it's Checkpoint or Sophos can alert us to it. and give them credit for doing the work, and at the same time say, hey, you are protected. And I think that's ultimately a good thing for the customers we're protecting.
Yeah, no, and I think that, that early share program really reflects the fact that I always talk about, there are multiple modes to sharing, right? You've got the automated sharing mode. That's important because we need the machines to be sharing data at speed, at scale. But we also have that analytic sharing mode, which is the human to human speed sharing, right? And that's important too, because the humans have actually got to go do something with all this shared threat intelligence. And, having that analytic connection in addition to the automated connection is really important. And again, it's part of what gives, I think, CTA its strength, is that we look at sharing in a multi-dimensional way, and that's how you have to look at it. And there's not just one right way of doing the sharing. It has to be done in multiple different ways. Joe Levy, what do you think about the threats or problems that can only be addressed through sharing?
Yeah, both you, Michael, and Joe mentioned this, but there's no single vendor that has a kind of a perfect view of everything that's happening in the industry. And yeah, the metaphor that's useful here is blind man and the elephant. Like we all have a somewhat unique perspective into the threat landscape, and when we put it together, then we get a much more complete picture of things. But in order to move quickly, we leverage the combined intelligence and combined viewpoints of the different vendors. So there's this idea of like potentiation, like when does something actually inflect to the point that the industry needs to really be paying attention to it. And that's something that could be driven by the kind of confirmatory effect that we get from multiple vendors participating and saying, hey, we're all observing the same thing happening. We could very quickly get an idea of kind of the scale and the severity of the threat based on that combined view. And then in order to effectively disseminate that information, having the ability for multiple vendors to reach out to their customers, that's going to provide the most efficient means of collecting the intelligence, confirming the intelligence, understanding the severity of the threat, and then actually getting it out to products and services so that they can provide practical protections.
No, that's really great. Thanks, Joe. Dorit?
Yeah, so I'd touch on like particular points in timeline, like SolarWinds, where you have a fast-moving thing. You see only some aspect of that, and everyone has their own aspect. And your goal is to get and understand initial PPTs the fastest as you can, in order to give the best security, in order to give the widest perspective, and to help protect your customers. And there is nothing like trusted sharing in this phase, that you know that everything you get is reliable, and you could really separate maybe perceptions from reality. Did you actually see something? You just guessing that it's there? And it's very factual, including be able to share quickly indicators that would help you close the whole mission more fast. And so the perspective of very fast moving attacks, and we know that the attack landscape is such that more attacks are fast moving, because the attackers, as soon as they have like a golden egg at hand, what they want is to leverage it to the maximum possible. So they would do it as fast as possible, because they know that after some time it would get closed. So in this case, you have to respond very quickly, and the collaboration and the kind of sharing is really critical. In addition for this, actually the other points mentioned here, like geography coverage or verticals, or coverage of kind of vectors of entries and stuff that you may not be the expert on, but adds your perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's something that perspective issue is one that CTA works hard on. When you look at CTA's membership, we really try to push that, right? We have companies that are headquartered in 11 different countries around the world. All three of you are global, right? You have global operations. you specialize in different things, and we have different companies that specialize in different parts of the ecosystem that are members of CTA. And I think all of those, those differences in points of view, make for a stronger collaboration, in the end. So one thing I wanted to actually, sort of turn to, and Joe Chen, I think we'll start with you, especially since you've been involved in this for so long. Has CTA grown and evolved the way you thought it would, or has there been something that's really surprised you about how things have changed over the last 5 years?
Pleasant surprises are rate of growth, and now I think we have more than reached a critical mass. I think we're thriving. I think CTA is really thriving, right? And so that's great. And the intel that's shared is also real, and I'm very pleased to see that. What's surprising is I think we have yet to kind of capture the 100% of the sharing market, meaning I kind of don't get it why there we're even in sharing there's a segmentation in sharing. Why are not all the biggest players or biggest vendors part of this? For a lot of reasons, I think we all understand, like, you may compete a little bit, but ultimately I think this is going to help our customers and help all the vendors from doing well. So I think we still got more work to do and kind of get the message out and be able to continue to grow more. And that's going to continue to help the existing vendors as well. From a pure number perspective, is awesome. I think last year the data was 67 million observables, and continue to have double-digit growth of things we're scaling and sharing, and it's just awesome numbers to see. So that's it, Michael. It's mostly great.
Great. Yeah, Dorit, what about you? Has CTA grown and evolved the way you thought it would, or has there been surprises? Or
yeah, I think it's the founding team was a collection of strong names in the industry that to conduct a fair enough coverage initially to interest others to join. But I do see the growth since then as impressive. Particularly, I'm happy to see that there are like non-huge players that are still able to join and are still able to contribute enough information so that we would think that they worthwhile, and they stand to the standard and the same kind of measures. And I think it's very important because they give the other perspective sometimes. They sometimes represent a bit different audience, a bit different vectors, a bit different geographies. So I'm particularly happy. I think that once you reach some critical mass, all the large guys should join. But I'm particularly happy to see that we are able to also have enough data shared by the other guys, the smaller guys, or the less, worldwide guys that could contribute, and we could enjoy their outcome.
Yes, I think when I look at the diversity in the CTA membership, that's another factor that I often cite. I mean, we have some companies that are very small, and frankly we have several that are like our South Korean members are typically pretty much focused on Korea, like most of their customers are there, but that's a very valuable perspective. And we have MSSPs, we have those that are associated with telecoms. So, I mean, I think that's all provides a different way of looking at the world. Joe, from Levy, from your perspective, how has CTA grown and evolved the way you thought it might, or has something really surprised you?
I love Dorit's point about being able to support members from the startup community. I think that's so important, and the fact that we've created structural support for their participation, I think it's a fairly recent evolution for the CTA, but I think it's a wonderful one, and it's those kinds of innovations that are going to continue to drive the success. Overall, what I've really been most impressed with is that we've managed to maintain a grounding in skin in the game principles, and we don't just collect trophies and try to bring on as many vendors as we possibly can into the organization. We're sort of maniacal about the measurement of the data quality that we have. There's a transparency in how we share the information that really helps to prevent that sort of free rider hindrance that we were talking about earlier. And the fact that we continue to measure things and publish things as transparently as we do, I think is going to help to retain the data quality as the participation grows larger. And we're also going to be able to accommodate some of these specializations that we were talking about, whether it's within a particular sector like OT or whether it's in a certain geography. So yeah, it's been quite good.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and we very early on decided that we really wanted to, focus on that data quality. And what's interesting to me is, of course, while there are certain measures of quality that are common, what we've also learned is that because of those different perspectives, different companies find value in different parts of the information in different ways. And one of the key things that I've learned is to not prejudge what a company is going to find valuable, because I never cease to be surprised at the reporting that I'll get back of like, oh, that was really great. Okay, that kind of surprised me. I wasn't expecting that. But now that you say that, I understand why that makes sense in your business model. And I think that's really important to keep in mind that even if the data is not necessarily this particular set of data, right? This particular thread of sharing might not be valuable to every single CTA member in exactly the same way. It might be valuable to some. And to get back to Joe Chin's point, then that feeds into them protecting their customers better, which ultimately actually helps the entire, the entire ecosystem. I think the next question that I would pose is sort of where do you think we should go from here? How should the and not just CTA, how should the cybersecurity industry continue to think about this problem of threat intelligence sharing, and where should we actually go from here?
Yeah.
And go ahead, Dory.
I would start with the CTA perspective, but it's also a generic perspective. So the Holy Grail at the end, and what the attackers do is that they compare methods, or they understand deeper methods when they progress. And so the whole kind of industry trend and what we should strive to do is get to share more of the principles. And this is harder because this is a bit goes beyond governance and the measuring and the scoring of the data, etc. It goes to something that is a bit harder to measure. But if we are able at some point to kind of to go to a more identifiable methods way, I think it would be where we really reach the collaboration that helps us, stand versus the collaboration of the attackers. This is where the difference is really beyond the indicator. So we are trying to do this. We're trying to share not just the indicators, but their sensors and the information behind them. So I think we are doing good progress compared to what's doable. But if I'm trying to think what's the kind of the end, what is the end idea is if we could really explain the essence of an attack in either in a formal language or without a formal language in a way that we could share.
I think that really makes sense, and it starts to feed into a third kind of sharing that I think that I am very interested in continuing to expand out. So if you have that automated sharing, that is the sharing of the technical data at scale, and you've got the analytical sharing, which is that human speed analysis, then that third kind of sharing is really about operational collaboration. How do you actually use that shared threat intelligence to support operations? And, there it's about sort of how does the private sector use what it can do to help governments do what they do best, to actually impose costs on the adversaries? How do we take some of the pressure off of governments on the defensive side, so that they can focus their efforts on disruption, right, and imposing costs on the adversaries? And so I think that that's a really important aspect of where we need to go and evolve. And Dorit, I think you're right that some of that is we don't fully have the languages built out for that, of how you express that. But I think that's very much where we need to head. And if you think about, the situations that we face, as you say that, the bad guys continue to innovate and evolve, and we have to, try to stay ahead of them. It's a very lucrative thing to be in the bad guy cyber business right now.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to make that less lucrative is really where we need to be. But Joe, Levy, where do you think the industry needs to head?
Well, I think we should leverage some of the lessons learned here, like the economic principles of the CTA just work quite well. We talked about things like transparency and metrics and this operating principle of skin in the game. I think that's one of the reasons why previous sorts of alliances and collectives just haven't worked. They haven't applied the appropriate economic principles to their operation. So that's one thing that we can immediately pick up and try to transmit to other efforts. But then I think this notion of grammars is a very important one also. Like we're very, very good at sharing these more basic sort of indicators, and we're within the CTA itself, we're transitioning from simple indicators to behaviors, and then you go from behaviors to like courses of action, and these more adaptive grammars that we're seeing, like Oasis, for example. They're working on one it's called Cacao, the collaborative automated course of action for operations for cybersecurity. So being able to aggregate the intelligence up into more operational elements that can actually help the consumers of this threat intelligence defend themselves, rather than just collecting threat intelligence and saying, okay, now what do I do with this? Do I just pull it into my SIM? Do I get this configured in my firewall using my SOAR tooling? Like, provide the means by which they can actually put it to practical use. And again, the result is just going to be a much more hygienic operating environment for every network in the world.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really important. Like when you look at where CTA is going in that sense too, like we're looking at how you begin to build in, graph databases into this, right? Why? Because what's important is often the linkages between the individual bits, right? The bits, yes, they have value themselves, but it's actually also the linkages between them that actually really matter. And so I think continuing to build out those capabilities is, that's super important. And I really also think the idea that you want to help companies, the end user, right? What they really want to know is, what do I need to do differently today than I was doing yesterday? What action do I need to take? It's great that you've told me all this, but what do I need to do? And we need to make that as easy for the end user as possible. I have to think about, you have this experience, right, of, you also serve as the security person for your families. I have to think about, like, telling my mother and my, rest of my family, like, what do you actually need to do, to make yourself safer online? So that's a kind of way of looking at intelligence that I think is really important. Joe, Chin, where do you think the industry should be going?
I think we actually have an opportunity to kind of turn this whole thing upside down and be able to solve this, a chunk of the security problem together, and once for all, in a way. I tell you, the vision here is, aside from sharing what's bad, okay, I think we also have an opportunity to start kind of thinking about sharing what's good. Meaning, imagine as a group, we're now sharing the possibility for all the behavioral descriptive of whether it's a web application or an application or process, all that I should do or could do that's being declared, okay? And all of that at this point might be less than the number of pieces of malware or things, attacks and campaigns at this point, okay? And if we were to do that, we can publish and make that a super transparent, thing we publish, okay, to the world as a manifest and such, and all of us using control points can validate. I think it could eliminate some of the biggest problems like supply chain attack. Okay, so if someone were to get into your supply chain and put in a third-party library that goes to a malicious URL for an update and bring pieces, now that it doesn't belong. It's not declared. And I think as together we can actually kind of see that, control it, get to a critical mass. And something like that together will just change the cybersecurity protection world. And it's within the realm of possibility at this point.
No, that's really great. That's really great, Joe. And I like that idea of also sharing what's good, like, best practices and what really works. And I think I've always been a big proponent of, and Joe Levy's mentioned this, that economics, right? That we also have to look at it from that business perspective of the end user, and sharing what works in a way that is economical, right? That is connected to their business operations. Like, that's really the key to having people actually use the security that all of you are working so hard to produce. Because it doesn't do any good if the end user is working very hard to get around all of the security that you've so painstakingly built. So we're coming to the end of the webinar and our time. So I'm gonna ask each of you to sort of come up with your closing thoughts. What message would you want to sort of leave the listeners with as we close this out? And of course, if any of the folks that are listening to this, if you are interested in joining CTA, you can always find out more information on our website, cyberthreatalliance.org. So smush all of that together, cyberthreatalliance.org, and you can find out how to become a member of CTA. So Dorit, maybe we'll start with you on sort of final closing thoughts.
Yeah, I think that the cyber is a space where things are evolving and people are learning. So the attackers are learning and evolving, and the attacks are faster and more global and wider reach. But we are also learning and evolving, and I think the CTA is a great out of the box resolution to how we could make a jump that is not trivial, and create some common protection that would have tighter protection for the world among the evolving threats. And this is I think an important trend to keep and to evolve. And there were great ideas in the call on things that we could do further along. I also think that it's important to understand that one of the ways to handle the evolving threats is to prevent, and not just to give up and to assume that they are in sight. So we should try to prevent as much as we can. So we would keep a good hygiene in the organization, and so we would see if there is something else running around. And so again, the Cyber Threat Alliance helps us prevent more attacks faster, and this is a huge contribution and importance for this landscape. So I'm a true believer that we are doing good in terms of how we progress in our defenses, and we do have strong adversaries that we have to win upon. So it's not going to settle down and say, now we could just rest and it's all working for us.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Thank you, Dorit. Joe Levy.
Yeah, I really like Dorit's point about not giving up on prevention. There has been a kind of a capitulation in the industry. Oh, prevention isn't perfect, therefore we don't want to invest any effort into that anymore. We just want to invest everything into detection. And the reality is you need both, of course. And the better your prevention is, the more effective your detection efforts could be. So yeah, let's not forget about that. What I really enjoyed about the CTA is that it has served as kind of an antidote to the cynicism that surrounds any kind of a threat intelligence sharing effort in the industry. It's just a great example of how you can make threat intelligence sharing work. And anyone who needs to be reminded of the value of threat intelligence ought to look at the example being set by the CTA and just how effective it can be. And what it does is it allows all of the member companies to lead by example, to do more than just pay lip service to intelligence sharing and to this notion of generosity, and to actually demonstrate that it can work. And the more members that we can get who are participating in this, the more I think as an industry we can overcome this sort of cynicism that we have, and we can normalize threat intelligence sharing in a way and at a scale that we've not been able to in the past.
No, thanks, Joe. And I think it's really important to that perspective on not giving up on prevention is absolutely key, right? Like, it doesn't mean that you put all your eggs in the prevention basket, to borrow that metaphor, right? You also invest in other parts of that chain, but you want to maximize your opportunity to disrupt the bad guy anywhere along the chain. And I think of that as that's how you flip the equation around from thinking about the good guy has to be right every single time. Well, you want the bad guy to have to be right every single step of the way. Like, they've got to evade the preventions. They've got to evade the detection. They've got, if you set it up that way, then, it really gives the defender many more bites at the apple to actually, prevent the bad guy from achieving what they want to achieve. And that's a really important place to be. All right, Joe Chen, you get the last word here. Bring us home for
All
this.
right.
Any kind of parting thoughts? So.
All right, something lots to go. I think it's called for action, right? We talk a lot. There's an action to be had here. So I'm going to channel my good friend Rick Howard, one of the, who was the CISO at Palo Alto when we did this together. And it's a lot of thought-provoking kind of questions that when we first worked on this together, so Rick will say, "Hey, let's get if you're on the good side. Let's this is my variation of it. You're on the good side. You're on the vendor. You're an employee. Ask your leadership, why are we not part of this sharing process and being part of a good effort? If you're a vendor, if you are a customer that's paying all of us, I think you also have the power to really ask the questions. Hey, if you try to get into our environment and try to be part of our many vendors, are you part of the CTA? Are you sharing? Are you also getting contribution from others? I think those questions will really drive the kind of additional more sharing and really encourage us to all work together even more. That's it. That's the parting thought.
Excellent. Couldn't have said it better. And definitely channeling Rick Howard is a good thing. So on that score, and he would definitely frame it up like that.
Yeah.
Well, Dorit, Joe, Levy, Joe Chen, thank you very much for taking the time to chat with me today on this and on this topic. I think it's something that's really important for the industry to continue to do. And I am really excited about what we've been able to achieve over the last 5 years, and I'm really looking forward to what we can achieve over the next 5. So thank you very much, and thanks to everybody who joined in for the discussion today. I'm sure we'll be seeing each other soon.